You are not standing at the front of a fearsome raiding fleet. No, not today. Today you are simply one of 43 men aboard a medium-sized Viking longship called the Krákudrakinn, somewhere off the coast of what would one day be called Scotland. The wind is lazy and the sea is slower still. This morning is calm, not in the poetic sense, but in the absolutely nothing is happening sense. The air smells like old wood, fish oil, and unwashed wool. Your feet ache from sleeping on the rough deck planks, and the only sound is the squeaky groan of the oarlocks as the rowers half-heartedly dip their blades into the sea. There is no storm on the horizon, no enemy on the wind. The most dangerous thing right now is a loose splinter under your thigh. You glance down at your hands. They are thick from rope work. Yesterday you helped hoist the sail. Rough wool dyed with crushed walnut shells, and now you are paying for it in blisters. You also lost your spoon. That's more troubling than it sounds. A spoon is essential on a longship. Eating is done with a bowl, a flat stone, or sometimes your hand. But the spoon, your spoon, is personal. It is bone-carved, with a dull tip, and an iron-stained handle from when it fell too close to the fire. Now it's missing. You suspect Jorund took it. He's been eyeing your spoon ever since he broke his on-dried herring. At the front of the ship, the steersman adjusts the tiller. His name is Halfdan, and he's older than salt. He hasn't said much since dawn, except to mumble something about the sail being too tight. You consider asking him if we're close to land, but the truth is, you don't really care. The sky is gray. The water is gray. Your thoughts are gray. There's something oddly soothing about it. You stretch your legs and shuffle past a pile of coiled rope. Behind you, the men are muttering about breakfast. Not that there's much choice: dried fish, thick rye crusts, and a chunky stew made from barley and onion. Sometimes there's goat fat if you're lucky. Today, there's no goat fat. Breakfast is handed out by Sigrid, the only woman aboard, and the ship's unofficial keeper of order. She's not here for war. She's here to trade, cook, and keep idiots from stabbing each other over bread. Sigrid has a scar down one arm and a voice that could strip bark from a tree. She hands you your bowl and smirks. No spoon? She asks, not bothering to hide the judgment in her voice. You shrug and begin to eat with 2 fingers and your pride. As the stew settles in your stomach, you listen to the ship's slow rhythm. The planks creak, the ropes slap gently against it. The mast, and somewhere behind you, someone begins humming an old farm tune from Uppsala. It's tuneless, but strangely comforting. The crew passes time in the usual ways. Some men play a game using carved bone dice. Others mend a net or sharpen a blade that won't see battle for weeks, if ever. The ship isn't sailing toward a grand conquest. It's heading to a coastal trade post to exchange wool, amber, and cured fish for tin and iron nails. You lie back against a sack of salted cod and close your eyes. Your boots are off, your feet are sore, and you think about how your brother back home is probably knee-deep in pig muck by now. At least here, you can see the sea. Then a low whistle sounds from the prow. Not a warning, just a habit. The man at the front saw a gull. That means land. Maybe an island, maybe not. There's no urgency. It's just another dull marker in the slow motion of the voyage. You wonder how long it will take to reach land. A day? 3? Will you get your spoon back before then? Did Jorund really take it? Or did it fall into the sea during yesterday's storm drizzle? You drift off slightly, not to sleep, but into that liminal space sailors know well. The floating mind, where you're not quite thinking but also not quite still. Someone passes by you, stepping over your leg without a word. A rope creaks again. Someone else sneezes. Sigrid curses mildly in the background. One of the younger crew starts polishing his helmet. You never understood that. The shine won't last. Long, not in the sea air. and certainly not on a boat full of fish oil and sweat. But people need rituals, even on the water, maybe especially on the water. You used to polish your own shield until you traded it for half a jug of salted mead. Worth it, probably. Halfdan finally speaks again. He points toward the western horizon. Tide's going to turn soon, he says. That means rowers will have to work a little harder. Not that you're one of them today, you're part of the idle rotation. Your job, if the sail stays slack and the tide turns, will be to ladle out more stew and keep the fire pit stable. It's barely warm now, just a few embers tucked beneath a mound of ash in a clay-lined box. Cooking at sea is a lesson in restraint. Too much flame and you'll light the sail on fire. Too little and you're gnawing cold barley paste, you think. Back to home. Back to when your mother used to make stew with duck, leeks, and a pinch of crushed juniper. She used to say every good day needed 4 things: warmth, something to chew, a cloud to watch, and a spoon. You had none of those right now. Maybe a cloud, maybe half a bowl of stew, but definitely no spoon. A shout from the back breaks your daydream. Jorund is standing there holding something in his hand. It's your spoon. Found it by the coil, he says, tossing it toward you. You catch it. It smells like fish, but it's yours. Sigrid watches this exchange with a knowing smile. She doesn't say anything. You get the feeling she saw it the whole time. You also get the feeling she was letting Jorund hold on to it for a bit, to teach you some kind of lesson about paying attention. You nod and clean the spoon with the edge of your sleeve. It's a small victory, but a comforting one. The wind picks up slightly. The sail stiffens and the ship creaks with a new energy. It won't last, of course, but it's enough to let Halfdan lean back a little and stop steering. For now, you start humming the same old tune from earlier. No words, just sound and motion. You realize something. Today is not heroic, not dramatic, not legendary, but it is, in its own slow, splinter-filled way, completely peaceful. No blood, no conquest, just stew, fog, and a spoon returned. And still, as the water slaps gently against the wood and the gull cries somewhere unseen, you wonder. The midday sun finally burns through the mist, though sun may be too generous a word. It's more like a glow behind a thick sailcloth sky. You wouldn't call it warm, exactly, but it's not cold anymore, and that's a start. The Krákudrakinn creaks a little louder now. The tide has shifted, the sails caught a bit more air, and the men have straightened their backs, not from purpose, but from habit. The wind isn't strong, but it's steady, and Halfdan lets the tiller drift a few inches left, then right, in a rhythm even he could probably do in his sleep. Somewhere beneath the deck boards, water sloshes softly in the ballast chamber. Someone knocks over a wooden bowl. The barley stew has settled like a lump in your belly. It's not unpleasant, just heavy. The kind of heaviness that doesn't inspire greatness, but makes you grateful for sitting still. The goal for today, if it can be called a goal, is to reach a quiet trade post along the coastline. Not a town, not even a true village. Just a known inlet where locals will come down to the beach with goods. Tin nails, rough cloth, maybe a few bars of iron. You're carrying amber, wool, smoked fish, and goat pelts. Sigrid also brought a small barrel of soap. Her own recipe, lie-heavy but surprisingly good at cutting through salt grease. It's not glory, but it's business. And for most Viking crews, business was the real goal more often than battle. Glory gets remembered. Trade gets you fed. You find your spoon, now clean and slightly less fishy, and return it to the twine loop on your belt. Beside it dangles your eating knife and a carved bone comb. The essentials, Halfdan calls out a low, lazy order. If you're not rowing, check the ropes. We don't want that mast tipping again. He's referring to the near disaster 3 days ago when a loose lashing caused the sail beam to pitch dangerously in a mild squall. No one was hurt, but Halfdan's been paranoid since. You walk over to check a knotted length of hemp. It's damp but strong. You tug it, nod, and return to your seat. Storm's behind us, Jorund mutters. He's chewing something, probably dried turnip root. It stinks. You don't respond. The real storm, however, is in Sigrid's face. She's muttering to herself and pacing near the back of the ship. In one hand, she holds a waxed linen pouch. In the other, a piece of parchment. You know what's wrong even before she says it. "The map's gone," she declares, loud enough for everyone to hear. 15 heads turn. Some blink slowly. A few men grunt. One yawns. "Gone where?" asks Halfdan. "If I knew that, I wouldn't be yelling," she replies. The map isn't a full chart, just a simple sketch on animal hide, drawn by a friendly trader 2 summers back. It shows key inlets and tide curves along this coast. It's not precise, but it's more reliable than memory, especially in the featureless waves of this region. Losing it is inconvenient. You watch her check the pouch again, then her sack, then beneath a plank where she keeps her cooking tools. Nothing. Could it have blown away? Someone asks. She narrows her eyes. You think I leave the map flapping in the wind like a laundry sheet? Silence. Did anyone see it last night? She presses. Jorund raises a hand lazily. I saw you writing on it. You were adding that new inlet we passed. She nods. I did. I left it in my pouch, and now it's not. The ship doesn't stop for a missing map, of course, but the tension becomes a new kind of wind. Everyone's just a bit more alert, a bit more aware of their own gear. You help check under loose barrels and inside a coil of line. You find a broken sandal, 3 fish bones, and a perfectly round pebble that someone declares lucky. No map. Eventually, Sigrid folds her arms and sits. Fine, she says. We remember well enough. We'll watch for gulls, follow the moss lines on the cliffs, and count the tide rises. But if we miss the inlet and trade nothing, don't blame me. No one does. The truth is, she's the best. Memory aboard. She remembers not just places, but faces and quantities. How much tin fetched how many pelts, and who shorted them last summer. Afternoon settles in like a damp blanket. A few men doze. Others polish gear. One carves a fish into a piece of driftwood, a gift for his daughter back home. You take out your comb and run it through your beard. It snags on a knot. You sigh and yank it free. Halfdan mutters to himself as he adjusts the sail. Might be east of us now. Hard to say. Time on a long ship stretches. It doesn't feel like movement. It feels like waiting while the world moves beneath you. The horizon doesn't change. The sea doesn't offer clues. You think about the map again. Where could it have gone? Maybe it slipped through a gap. Maybe it was taken. But who would want it? Jorund has poor eyesight. Sigrid wouldn't misplace it. You begin to wonder, what if a seabird took it? Not likely, but it amuses you. By late afternoon, the mood shifts. A shape forms on the horizon. Low cliffs. Nothing dramatic. Just stone and scrub. The kind of coastline that doesn't look like much until you're nearly upon it. Halfdan perks up. That might be it, he says. Sigrid stands and squints. Could be, or the next one. Depends. On the tide line. The rock shelf should be broken in the middle. You all stare. It might be a broken shelf. It might just be shadows. The ship glides on, no urgency, no drums. The sail breathes like a sleeping lung. Then, from the other side of the ship, a shout. Smoke! Sure enough, a faint pillar of gray rises in the distance. Not a wildfire, just a thin wisp. Maybe a cook fire, maybe a signal. Sigrid squints. That's it. That's where we're going. The crew begins to stir in earnest now. Not with excitement, but preparation. Ropes are checked. Goods are pulled from sacks. You find the soap barrel and start counting bundles. The approach will take another hour at least. Halfdan begins to angle the sail, steering wide to catch the wind, avoiding the shallows. You glance down at your belt again. Spoon, knife, comb, all there. Your eyes linger on the sea, and you wonder, the sun is slanting now, turning the waves, a dusky silver blue. As you approach the coastline, the faint plume of smoke drifts lazily above the rocky outcrop. The oars are dipped into the water, not in urgency, but in ceremony. Rowing helps guide the Krákudrakinn precisely through the final stretch where wind alone won't cut it. No one speaks, not out of tension, but from a kind of reverence. After days of sameness, fog, fish, stew, blisters, the appearance of land with the promise of trade feels like stepping back into the human world, even if only for an afternoon. The beach is narrow and stony, framed by low cliffs tufted with grass. A goat bleats from somewhere up the slope. You spot 3 figures already approaching the shore. A man with a stick, a younger woman in a blue shawl, and an older one carrying a bundle wrapped in linen. Their postures are relaxed. This isn't a confrontation. It's business as usual. Halfdan orders the sail down. It flaps once, twice, then slumps against the mast. The ship glides the last few meters on oar power before the keel gently crunches into gravel. The men hop out, boots sinking slightly as they drag the boat forward just enough to steady it. The first sound on shore isn't a voice. It's Sigrid's boot thumping onto rock. She jumps off the ship with the confidence of someone who has done this 50 times before. She walks up to the woman in blue, says something low and short, and then nods. Trade is beginning. No one rushes to join. There's a quiet etiquette to this. The crew stays by the ship, pulling out bundles and barrels, stacking them neatly, airing out furs, and brushing salt dust off woolen cloth. You find yourself assigned to soap duty. You gently lift the small, heavy barrel and set it upright on a wide, flat stone. One of the locals walks over and sniffs the open lid. She recoils slightly. You nod. It's strong, you say. She nods back. But useful. Trade unfolds not in words, but in glances, gestures, the occasional grunt. A strip of wool here, a small knife there, a string of smoked perch swapped for 2 heavy clay pots. No coins, just objects changing hands, marked by memory and quiet agreement. Sigrid handles the soap. She always does. It's her recipe: goat fat, wood ash, and dried marigold, with a touch of brine. Harsh on open skin, but unbeatable for removing fish grease. The locals seem pleased. They hand over a bundle of dried cabbage leaves and a few hunks of pinkish salt pork. She sniffs it, shrugs, and accepts. Meanwhile, a younger crewmate finds a new comb carved from driftwood and swaps it for a bit of amber. He seems overly proud of the deal. You say nothing. One of the men from the village beckons to Halfdan and points up the cliff. Spring water, he says in Norse, or something close to it. Cold. Good. The steersman waves for a few of you to follow. You volunteer. It feels good to stretch your legs. The path is narrow and damp, lined with moss and low ferns. As you climb, the sea behind you turns a deeper blue, and the ship below looks smaller. You reach the spring, more of a trickle coming from a rock face, but it's cold, sweet, and clean. You fill a few skins, splash your face, and linger. For a few minutes, you're alone at the edge of the ridge. A breeze brushes your face. You see the ship below, Sigrid still trading. The others laughing as someone bites into a strange root and immediately regrets it. This, you realize, is the real Viking life. Less fire and glory, more cabbage and rope. Less blood, more blisters. No bard will sing about today. No saga will record the return of your spoon or the softness of the moss here under your boots. But it happened. You were here. By the time you return to the ship, trade is nearly done. The goods are lighter, the bundles leaner. In their place are iron nails, coarse blue fabric, a single carved whistle shaped like a bird, and 3 round wheels of sheep cheese. Sigrid lets you carry one. It smells like victory. The villagers retreat with equal satisfaction, walking back up toward the goat calls and the flickering hearths behind the trees. You help push the ship back out, boots sloshing in the tide line. The hull creaks, resists, then floats free. Back aboard, the men move slowly. Some sit, some stretch. Halfdan raises the sail again. Sigrid secures the new items under a woven net. You sit down, pick up your spoon, and scrape a few crumbs of cheese from a flat stone. Evening sets in. The sea, never in a hurry, rocks you gently back into your role. One man among many, carried forward by canvas and salt and routine. Later, as the stars begin to appear, you and Yoren sit side by side. He's humming again. This time it's a different tune, still tuneless, but comforting. You finally ask the question that's been nagging at you since midday. Did you take the map? He looks at you, then away. No. You wait. He smiles. But I think it fell through the gap by the firebox. I saw something brown get sucked under when the wind turned. I didn't say anything. You nod. Somehow that makes sense. You going? To tell Sigrid? He asks. You shake your head. She already knows. The stars are clearer now. A gull cries once in the distance. The ship rocks on. The map is gone. The trade is done. The spoon is safe. And as the waves whisper against the hull and the men drift into sleep, you think? You wake up to the smell of warm dust and boiling ink. It's not the most poetic start to a morning in 2nd century Roman Egypt, but for you, Lucius Vorenus Secundus, minor tax clerk and full-time sufferer of sunstroke, it's just another Thursday. You're in Hermopolis, a provincial town sitting quietly between the Nile's sparkle and the desert's dry scowl. It's not glamorous, but the pay arrives eventually, and the baker down the street still owes you a favor from last Saturnalia. The air is already hot. The walls of your small brick office sweat salt as the early sun beats against the flat clay roof. There is no breeze, only the rhythmic scratching of a stylus on wax tablets. You're not the one writing. Your assistant, Flavius, is transcribing a long list of goat head counts from a nearby village. You've already read it twice, and it still makes no sense. One farm claims 12 goats, but notes 13 shadows at sunset. It's not clear if the missing goat was imaginary, or if someone's child is very, very small and hairy. You sigh and adjust your tunic. There's sand in the folds again. There's always sand. A typical day for a Roman tax official in Egypt does not involve sword fights or thrilling legal debates. It involves dust, ink, measuring baskets of grain, and arguing with farmers who claim their oxen mysteriously die every tax season. You know better. Your main job today is to check scrolls, cross-reference grain reports, and prepare for the bi-monthly grain levy. Rome wants its tribute, and Egypt, breadbasket of the empire, is expected to provide. You're the quiet middleman in that transaction. The man who counts grain that will feed legions hundreds of miles away. You unroll a scroll of papyrus. It's warped slightly from humidity, and the ink has faded along the edges. At the top is the symbol for Annona, grain tax. Beneath it, in tight Greek-Roman scribble, are tallies from 4 farming estates north of the city. Some of the numerals are smudged. One estate claims to have delivered 140 modi of grain, but you recall seeing only 100 sacks last week. You mutter, to yourself. Either they lied, or someone stole 40 sacks on the way. Probably both. Flavius looks up from the wax tablet. Should I write it as 140 or 100? You hesitate. Technically, you're supposed to write what was delivered, But if you do, someone at the top will ask questions. And when questions get asked in Rome, heads roll downhill, usually onto people like you. Write 100 to 20, you say. Split the difference. Let them all worry. Flavius nods and scratches the figure in wax. Outside, a donkey brays. A cart rattles by. A street vendor calls out about fresh dates and cold beer. You haven't had beer in a month. You've had plenty of dates, though, not the romantic kind. The chewy, sticky kind that glue your teeth together and stick to your scrolls. You stand and stretch your back. The air in your office is thick. You need to go outside, if only for a few minutes. You tuck a small folding fan into your belt and signal to Flavius. Back soon. Don't let the goats multiply while I'm gone, he snorts. I'll lock the scroll cabinet. Lock yourself in if you have to. You step out into the alley. Behind the office. It smells like fish and crushed figs. You're not sure why. The fig smell is suspicious. It means someone's been sneaking fruit from the governor's garden again. You wouldn't put it past young Marcus, the baker's nephew. Last week he sold you a fresh loaf with a bite already taken out of it. You turn the corner toward the grain warehouse. It's a squat, shadowy structure just off the main road, thick-walled and always too warm. You greet the guards at the door. One is dozing. The other nods and opens the wooden gate. Inside, it's darker and cooler. Pigeons flutter in the rafters. The grain is piled in sacks and baskets, some labeled with red chalk symbols. You run your hand across one. It's coarse wheat, probably from up north near Sinopolis. A good harvest. These sacks will be barged down the Nile within days. One sack is split along the bottom. You frown. That wasn't like that yesterday. Someone's been at it. You kneel, inspecting the hole. Just enough grain missing to feed a family for 2 days. Rat? The guard offers, stepping behind you. You shake your head. Rat would leave a mess. This was deliberate. The guard shrugs. We don't check every hour. You stand. Start, doing it every other hour at least, and move the sacks farther from the back wall. He nods but doesn't move. You head back toward your office, stopping only to grab a fig from the vendor who always overcharges but peels them nicely. Today, though, as you take a bite, the vendor raises a brow. That from me? He asks. You pause. No, I found it. He frowns. You sigh and toss him a small copper coin. Fair is fair. Back at the office, Flavius has dozed off with his stylus, still upright in the wax. You don't wake him. You sit, re-roll your scroll, and start drafting a short note to your superior about the suspected grain theft. You keep it vague. Too much detail invites follow-up questions, and you have dinner plans, namely, sitting quietly on your rooftop with a bowl of lentils and pretending you're in Rome. The hours tick by, scroll after scroll, wax after wax. A brief interruption, when a merchant bursts in complaining about tax on his goat skins. You explain patiently that the tax is not on the skins, but on the transport. He disagrees loudly, then leaves. You make a note. Watch for this one next time. The sun moves lower. Shadows stretch across the alley. You light a small oil lamp and unroll one last scroll for the day. It's an older one, tattered, curled at the edges, smells faintly of wine. A record from 2 years ago. You're looking for patterns, names that repeat, farmers who consistently over-report, or guards who let more grain pass than they should. You find a name, Gaius of Soknopaiou Nessos. You underline it. This man's grain deliveries have been suspiciously consistent. Exactly 118 modii every quarter. Never more, never less. It's impossible. No harvest is that predictable. Either he's hiding something, or he's the luckiest farmer in Roman Egypt. You lean back, stretch again, and feel the sweat cling to your back. You look at your sandals. One strap is fraying. You make a note to visit the cobbler tomorrow. Outside, the alley is quieter. The heat is finally dying. Someone down the street is playing a slow tune on a double reed pipe. It's not beautiful, but it's familiar. Flavius stirs. Is it evening? Past it, you say. Go home. He groans, stretches, and stumbles out. You extinguish the lamp, stack the scrolls, and wrap the wax tablets in cloth. Before leaving, you do one last thing. You pick up a small linen pouch, reach into your locked drawer, and tuck away your emergency fig, just in case. And as you lock the office door behind you and descend into the quiet of the narrow, warm streets, you can't help but wonder. You arrive early the next morning. A rare occurrence for someone who spent the night trying to scrape ink from his tunic sleeve. The stain won't come out. You're not surprised. Egyptian ink has a personality. It seeps into everything: clothes, fingernails, and sometimes your conscience. The streets of Hermopolis are waking up. Vendors are laying out wares, goats are braying with righteous indignation, and a boy is shouting about fresh lotus cakes, though no one believes him. You pass a scribe's stall where the latest gossip is already scratched onto a bit of discarded pottery. Marcia of the Baths, accused of water theft. You make a mental note to read the full version later. Probably nonsense. Your office, however, is dead silent. Flavius isn't here yet, which is fine. You need time alone with the scrolls. Not the boring ones. Those can wait. You're interested in something else today. The pattern you saw last night. Gaius of Soknopaiou Nessos. The farmer with the suspiciously perfect grain records. You pull the scroll again, smooth it over a flat stone, and reread the figures. 4 quarters, 118 modii of grain. Each entry signed, sealed, and sent to Alexandria. You remember none of it, and that bothers you. You search the storage shelf for the delivery records. Scrolls tied in pairs, receipt and payment. You find the name again. Same delivery, different seal. This time, the mark isn't Gaius's. It's someone else's. Scribbled, sloppily too, like a nervous apprentice. You frown. Flavius arrives, breathless and slightly damp. Sorry, he wheezes. A cart lost a wheel in front of the bakery. Did you help? No, he says with full honesty. I watched. You nod. Get the tablet. We're going to the grain office. The two of you walk under the rising sun. The heat is dry today. No clouds, just blue and glare. You duck into the shaded courtyard of the grain administrator, a man named Publius Naso, who smells like cumin and never remembers your name. He greets you with a loud, "Ah, scribbler, the man who counts what he doesn't lift." "Morning, Publius. I need the loading manifests for the Soknopaiou shipments last year," he grunts. "Again with the grain ghosts?" You don't reply. He waves toward a side room. "They're in the second cabinet, under S. If they haven't been eaten by rats," you dig through the stacks, pulling worn scrolls and brittle tablets. Eventually, you find what you're looking for: transport manifests. Official records of grain loaded onto Nile barges, bound for the southern ports. Gaius' name appears again, but something's off. There's a line scrawled at the bottom of one manifest. Delivered. 104 modii. Note: discrepancy due to loss during loading, but no sign of where the loss happened. No official complaint. No fine. Just a quiet adjustment. You look at Flavius. He's already scribbling. Check the others, you say. 3 more manifests. 2 show the same pattern. Minor losses. No investigation. No penalties. Only soft-footed silence. Someone skimming. Enough to feed a household, maybe 2. Not enough to raise flags, but enough to matter. On the walk back, Flavius finally says what you've been thinking. Is it Gaius? Or someone above him? You don't answer right away. Hard to say, but someone's keeping him protected. You stop at a tavern for a half loaf of bread and a cup of something cool. The tavern keeper has no teeth and laughs like he's choking on sand. He says something about his nephew becoming a soldier. You nod politely. Back at the office, you begin making a list, not for Rome, but for yourself. A personal ledger, names, tally marks, shipments, recurring guards, repeating seals. You're not an investigator, you're a clerk. But something is unraveling here, and it's strangely satisfying. It reminds you of something your father once said. He was a brick counter in Ostia. Not a builder, just a measurer. Empires don't run on generals, he told you. They run on the men who count bricks and grain and sandals. And if the count is wrong, everything wobbles. He was boring. But he was right. A courier bursts in around midday. Young, sweaty, and carrying a sealed scroll. From Alexandria, he pants, you break the wax. It's a report from the Northern Port Granary. Their own count of recent deliveries, and there it is again, Gaius's shipment, logged at 104 modii, but Alexandria recorded 98. 6 more missing. Due to spoilage, they say. No inquiry filed. That's 3 losses in 3 separate locations, all undocumented, all uninvestigated. You sit back and fold your arms. Flavius looks at you. How deep does this go? You shake your head. Too deep for someone with my pay grade. You write a brief, bland note to your superior mentioning discrepancies. You include no accusations, no names, just figures. Then you hide the real scroll, the one with your notes, beneath a loose stone under your desk. By now, the office is stuffy. A bird flutters past the window. You chew the last of your bread, now dry and tasteless. You decide to go for a walk. The street market is bustling. Sellers wave arms, children dart between stalls, and someone is playing music on a bone flute. You wander past fabrics, oils, nuts, dried lizards, and one extremely small horse. You stop. It's not a horse, actually, just a donkey. But it's been combed, oiled, and dyed with orange pigment to look like something exotic. A man beside it shouts, "Roman war pony, trained by centurions." A child is poking it with a stick. You don't know whether to laugh or confiscate it for misrepresentation. Flavius whispers, "Should I take it down as taxable livestock?" "No," you sigh. "Let the war pony be." The walk clears your head. You return to your office just as the light begins to soften into evening. A note is waiting on your desk. Not official. No wax. Just a folded scrap of papyrus. You open it. You ask too many questions for someone who counts grain. Let the figures sleep. There's no signature. You read it twice, then toss it into the oil lamp and watch it crinkle into ash. Flavius stares. "Are we in danger?" "No," you say. "We're in Egypt. Everything's always a little dangerous." You file the grain scrolls, tighten the leather on your sandals, and take one last look at your notes. Then you ask yourself. The next day begins with an odd silence. Not the peaceful kind that comes with cool morning air and empty streets. This is the kind of silence that feels like someone's watching from behind a curtain, waiting for you to do the wrong thing. Your office door is ajar when you arrive. Flavius hasn't arrived yet. That's not unusual. He's allergic to punctuality. But the door bothers you. You enter cautiously. Nothing seems missing. Your scrolls are stacked where you left them. The ink pot is uncorked but untouched, even. Your wax tablets remain undisturbed. Except, the scroll under the loose floor stone is gone. You close your eyes, exhale, and say nothing. Whoever took it was polite enough to leave the decoys untouched. That means 2 things. They knew what to look for, and they knew you knew. You sit down and stare at the wall for a while. A thin crack has grown near the ceiling. You make a note to report it. knowing you won't. When Flavius finally arrives, smiling, chewing a dried date, you ask him if he noticed anything strange on his way in. Strange like what? Like a man with a sword, or someone walking off. With our entire filing system, he blinks. No, just a cat sleeping on the scroll shelf. Of course, the cat gets more uninterrupted rest than you do. You let it go. There's no point asking around. If someone came from above to retrieve your notes, it's already done. If it was someone local, you'll hear about it soon enough. From the fish vendor, or a half-drunk butcher pretending to be a spy. Instead, you do what Roman bureaucrats have done for centuries. You start working again. You review the shipment manifest for the next levy. Draft a report about minor theft at the granary, leaving out the missing sacks, and calculate tax penalties for late deliveries. By noon, you've written 4 scrolls, ruined 1, and spilled ink on your only clean tunic. The day proceeds like every other, slowly, slightly dusty, and faintly suspicious. Then a runner arrives. He's young, overeager, and sweating through his linen. From the governor's office, he says, handing over a folded parchment. That's unusual. You break the wax seal. The script is elegant, too elegant for a governor, probably his secretary, to Lucius Vorenus Secundus, tax clerk of Hermopolis. We have reviewed your recent reports and appreciate your continued diligence. Please, be advised that discrepancies in grain accounts are currently under review by higher authorities in Alexandria. No further inquiry is required at the local level at this time. You are instructed to continue your duties as previously assigned. Ave, Sextus, Marcius Livius, Deputy Questor. You read it twice. They've seen your report. They've buried it. Politely, Flavius looks up from his scribbling. Good news? They've taken the matter upstairs. Will they fix it? You smile faintly. No, but now it's their problem. The day carries on. Outside, a sandstorm stirs on the horizon. It won't reach the town, but it sends a dry breeze across the rooftops. You take this as a sign to close the shutters and light the oil lamp early. It flickers a bit before catching. You miss the lamps in Rome. They burned straighter somehow. Flavius packs up to leave. You wave him off, then spend the last hour of sunlight organizing scrolls, sorting seals, and picking fig seeds out of your desk drawer. One has sprouted. You consider planting it. Then you don't. Eventually, you rise, stretch, and tuck away. Your work for the evening. On your way out, you pass the bakery. The owner offers you a loaf at half price. Guilt, maybe, for last week's tooth-marked offering. You accept. You take the bread to the riverside and sit on a low wall overlooking the Nile. The water is slow, steady, and tinged gold in the fading sun. Barges move like drifting leaves. Distant voices rise from the docks. Fishmongers, sailors, children calling home. You think about Gaius. He'll keep skimming, probably, unless someone above him gets greedy. Then someone will notice. Maybe, maybe not. You think about the empire, a beast of grain and letters, too big to fail and too slow to notice. You are a splinter in its great wooden hull. But even splinters matter sometimes. You tear off a piece of bread, chew slowly, and let the dust settle around your thoughts. You reach into your belt for your stylus and scratch one final note into your wax tablet. Let the river carry what you cannot hold. You don't know why you write it, but you do. And as the wind picks up, rustling papyrus stalks on the far bank, and the sky melts from orange to ash, you rise and make your way home. You pass the orange-painted donkey. Someone has washed it. It's just a donkey again. No war, pony. Just a small, tired animal pulling a small, tired cart. You smile. And as the lamps light across the city and the bureaucrats tuck in their ledgers, and the night scribes ready their brushes, you think, the rooster crowed 3 times before you even opened your eyes. By then, The fire should have already been fed. The coals should have been glowing. And your master, old Gerhardt, should have had his first mug of watered ale halfway down his throat. Instead, you were still on the straw mat, mouth dry, one boot on, soot smudged across your cheek, and the forge stone cold. It was the spring of 1456, in a town whose name travelers never remembered, somewhere south of Nuremberg, north of Too Small to Matter, and well within shouting distance of a very angry blacksmith. You are Jakob, apprentice, age 15, arm sore and heart sinking. When you burst through the workshop door, the first thing you heard was silence. That was worse than yelling. Old Gerhardt stood near the cold anvil, arms folded. He looked at the unlit forge, then at you, then back again. Your job, he said calmly, is not to invent new ways for metal to go cold. You didn't answer. Coal's in the bin. Bellows are dry. What are you waiting for? A priest too. Bless the fire? You shook your head and got to work. You pumped the bellows, fetched the kindling, shoved the pine shavings into the forge, and struck flint to steel. The spark caught on the third try, and the fire, reluctant and smoky, finally took. Too slow, Gerhardt muttered, walking past you. What if we had a horse waiting? We don't have a horse waiting. He turned, eyebrow raised. Yet, you added quickly. He grunted. Approval? Hard to say. The morning tasks began as they always did. Prep the tools, warm the tongs, oil the hammers, stack the scraps by size, and if possible, avoid spilling water on the hot coals again. Something you did once, and still hear about every third Tuesday. Gerhardt was a man of few words and fewer compliments, but he knew metal. You'd watched him shape hinges with the same precision as swords, bend plowshares smoother than river stones, and fix a broken latch faster than most men could scratch their beard. You, on the other hand, were still learning how to hold the tongs properly. Today's first task was simple: reforge a horseshoe. The old one sat on the workbench, a sad, twisted, rust-chewed relic that had once been nailed to a mare named Lenny, who had a limp and a very judgmental glare. Copy it, Gerhardt said. But better. You heated the iron blank, watched it glow from red to yellow. You placed it on the anvil, raised the hammer, and hit it at the wrong angle. The metal flinched, bent wrong. You tried again, adjusting the grip. Too late. The curve was uneven now. You pulled it from the anvil and stared at it. It looked like a pretzel drawn by someone who'd never eaten one. Gerhardt didn't speak. He walked over, picked up the bent piece, and held it in front of your face. This, he said, is a good start. You blinked. For a door knocker, he added. A very small door. For mice. You sighed. Again. The second time was better. Not perfect, but recognizably a horseshoe. You placed it next to the original and waited. Gerhardt nodded once. Lenny will judge it herself, he said. By mid-morning, the forge was hot, the workshop filled with the rhythm of tools. Clang, hiss, scrape, thump. You liked this part, the song of the shop, the hiss of water on steel, the grumble of the coals, the echo of hammer to iron. It was loud but never chaotic. Everything had its place. Your next task was to prepare rivets for a wagon wheel frame, 36 to be exact. Not 37, not 35. Gerhardt had counted once, and when you made too many, he made you carry the extras in your boot for a week. To teach your feet how numbers feel, he said. You set to work. The shop smelled like smoke, sweat, and warm iron. Not unpleasant, familiar, comforting in its own way. Halfway through the rivets, a knock came at the door. It was the baker's boy, red-faced and panting. Gerhardt, he called. Your order's late. Gerhardt raised an eyebrow. What order? The hinges for the oven door. Gerhardt stared at him. Then at you. You paled. You'd forgotten to finish the hinges yesterday. You'd left the second one in the water barrel overnight. It was probably rusted. "I'll do it now," you blurted. Gerhardt said nothing, just walked outside, muttering about bread that didn't deserve hinges. You sprinted to the barrel, pulled out the half-done hinge, and groaned. Rust bloomed across one edge. The barrel water had gone foul, too. Someone had dropped onion skins. In it again. You scrubbed the hinge, reheated it, and began filing it down. The metal hissed in protest. The curve wasn't clean, but you shaped it anyway. Fast, ugly, but functional. The boy left with both hinges before noon. You hoped he wouldn't show them to his mother. Lunch was bread crust, dried apple, and a sip of weak ale. You ate beside the open window. Outside, chickens clucked in the alley. A cart rolled past, full of beets. A town guard sneezed. Gerhardt sat across from you, chewing quietly. "Jakob," he said finally. "Yes? Why did the horseshoe fail this morning?" "You swallowed. I struck it wrong." "Why?" "I didn't line the angle." "Why?" You hesitated. "I was half asleep." He nodded. "Why?" "I overslept." He raised one eyebrow. You took a deep breath. "Because I was up late trying to finish the door latch for Frau Hilda's cottage." Gerhardt chewed. "She didn't ask for it," you added. "But the bolt kept slipping. She said it scared her at night." He put his crust down, wiped his hands. "That latch," he said, "was good work." You blinked. "Too thin on the tongue, but the fit was clean." You smiled. "A little." He stood, stretched his shoulders, and picked up a file. "Don't oversleep again." "I won't." He turned to the forge. "Because tomorrow," he said, "we start the gate hinge for the monastery." You straightened. The monastery gate was the biggest commission you'd ever seen him take. 2 iron frames, 12 hinges, engraved with knotwork and holy symbols. Everyone in town would pass through it. Monks, merchants, pilgrims. He handed you a fresh iron rod. "You strike first." You held it. It was heavier than usual, but your hands didn't shake this time. And as you stepped to the anvil and felt the heat rise and the hammer lift, you thought the monastery gates would be tall, but not grand. That was the brief. They should hold back bandits, not impress. "Kings," the prior had said, with a sniff that somehow carried the full judgment of Rome in a single exhale. Still, it was the most important commission old Gerhardt had taken in 3 years. You were now standing beside the anvil, holding the iron rod like a prayer. Gerhardt stood opposite you, hammer in hand. "Listen first," he said. You listened to the hiss of the fire, the creak of the bellows, the snap of pine in the brazier. You could even hear the far-off clang of the cooper's shop 3 doors down. Someone was shaping barrel hoops. Clumsy work. "Now strike," he said. You did. Not hard, not soft, just enough to start the shape. The rod bent willingly. You struck again, angling the head slightly. Again, again. The rhythm grew, and soon Gerhardt joined in. His hammer came after yours, just behind, like a counterbeat. You'd heard this sound all your life, but now you were in it. 2 hammers, 1 song. The monastery wanted 12 hinges, 6 large, 6 smaller. Each one needed to match, not just in size, but in attitude. You didn't know metal had attitude until you spent 3 hours trying to make a hinge curve identical to its twin and failed at the last curve. Gerhardt fixed it with 2 hits. "It's not just force," he said. "It's memory." Memory? Metal remembers how it was heated, how it was struck. It holds grudges. You believed him. By midday, you'd made 2 good hinges, 1 questionable one, and a 4th that now lived in the scrap bin, bent like a man after bad soup. Gerhardt let you eat lunch outside. You sat on the low wall behind the forge and chewed a piece of hard cheese. The village cat circled your legs. You gave it a crumb. It hissed anyway. When you returned, Gerhardt was drawing the hinge design onto a flat board with charcoal. He worked slowly, carefully. The symbol at the center was an old Christian motif, a looped knot shaped like a fish. You'd seen it before in books, never in iron. "You'll etch this one," he said. "You nearly dropped your tongs." "Me? You've got clean wrists. Steady enough. And," he added, "if you ruin it, we can melt it back down and blame the Cooper." You laughed nervously. "How deep should I go?" "Not deep enough to insult the saints." You practiced first, on scraps of iron too thin to use. You held the fine-pointed chisel, tapped it with the smallest hammer, and watched as lines appeared like black threads. Not too deep, not too crooked. Just enough to leave the shape in shadow. By your 6th try, the fish knot looked like a fish. Again, not a rat with a tail problem. The day passed in rhythm. Strike, shape, cool, quench, oil, repeat. By late afternoon, you'd completed 2 more hinges and etched one without disaster. Gerhardt inspected it, holding it close to the lamplight. "The top curve's off." You waited. "But," he continued, "the eye's clean. It sees." You tried not to grin. As the forge cooled, you helped sweep the ash and stack the scrap. The floor glowed faintly with ember dust. You liked the way the soot curled into cracks, like old ink. Before locking up, Gerhardt sat by the anvil and lit a small pipe. "You're learning," he said. You nodded. "Trying." Trying's the first part, not quitting's the second. He puffed once. "Most boys want swords, blades, war. That's noise. Hinges are gospel." You frowned. "Gospel? They hold the world together," he said. "You think people care about the door?" "No, they care it opens and closes, that it keeps out wolves, holds in warmth." He tapped his pipe. "You want to be useful? Make hinges that don't ask questions, that swing 100 times before they complain." You looked down at your hands. Blistered, burned, calloused in places you didn't know had skin. "I think I can do that." He stood, nodded, and motioned toward the bench. "Start early tomorrow. We've got 10 more." You didn't oversleep the next morning, and as you lay down that night, listening to the coals settle and the wind scrape the shutters, you thought you carried the last of the hinges wrapped in linen and tied with twine. It was early, still damp from night rain. The morning fog clung to the grass, and your boots left soft marks on the monastery path. You could hear bees already stirring in the hedgerows, and somewhere a donkey brayed as if offended by the hour. Beside you, Gerhardt walked in silence, his breath visible in the spring air. He carried the chisels and a small bottle of oil. "For the fittings," he'd said. But you suspected he brought the oil mostly because the hinges deserved a final polish. He hadn't said as much, but you'd worked beside him long enough to know that when something was important, he treated it quietly. The monastery gates were wide and heavy, oak-bound in iron straps. The wood had been planed smooth by carpenters, from the next town over. Fine work, by any standard. But until today, they hadn't been hung. Brother Aldrich met you at the entrance. Round-faced, perpetually winded, and smelling faintly of beeswax, he bowed and waved you in. "You're early. First light's good light," Gerhardt muttered. You began work immediately. The old hinge mounts were cleaned, but uneven. You measured, remeasured, then hammered in the pegs slowly, evenly, letting the metal settle. Gerhardt watched, occasionally, correcting your grip or angle with a grunt or a tap on the shoulder. When you lifted the first gate into place, heaving with all your strength as Gerhardt guided the hinge pin, you felt it click into the mount like it had always belonged there. It didn't creak. It didn't hesitate. It swung a perfect arc. Even the monks noticed. Brother Aldrich clapped softly. "No sound at all." Gerhardt raised one eyebrow. That's the idea. It took 2 hours to mount both gates, 5 more hinges, and 3 sets of iron latches. By the end of it, you were drenched in sweat, knuckles scraped, and heart racing. When you stepped back to look at it, it didn't feel like work anymore. The gate stood open, like a welcoming gesture, but they could close, strong and final, when needed. Gerhardt uncorked the oil and rubbed it into the hinges, humming a tune you'd never heard before. A blacksmith's hymn, maybe, or just something he'd made up. Brother Aldrich stepped forward, holding a small pouch. "Payment," he said. Gerhardt waved it away. "Send it by week's end. In coin, not potatoes." The monk laughed. "Agreed." Then, unexpectedly, Aldrich raised a hand and muttered a short prayer over the hinges. It was simple, a few Latin words, nothing dramatic. But it made the moment still. When he finished, he turned to you. "You forged the hinge on the inner side, didn't you?" You blinked. "Yes, brother. The one with the knotwork." "Yes," he nodded. "It's quietest of them all." You swallowed hard. Gerhardt didn't say anything, but he adjusted his belt, which was usually his version of a pat on the back. Back at the shop, you unloaded the empty satchels and oiled the tools. You washed your hands and noticed how clean your fingernails looked for once. You smelled like ash and iron and soap. Gerhardt lit his pipe. "You didn't oversleep," he said. "No. You worked like a smith." "Thank you," he puffed, slowly. Still too slow with the hammer twist, but the hinge was clean. You smiled. That evening you returned to the monastery, just to look, just to hear. The gates were shut now, holding in candlelight and chants. You leaned in and pushed. On. It opened smooth. No squeak, no give. You touched the hinge. It was cool now, but it held. The sun hasn't yet risen, but the air already smells like jasmine, charcoal, and boiling rice water. You are called Mei Lin, silk keeper to the House of Zhao, a mid-ranking merchant family tucked in one of the quieter quarters of Chang'an, the great beating heart of the Tang dynasty. Your hands are stained faintly yellow from the worm paste you've been preparing all week. It clings to your fingers even after 5 scrubs. But that's the job. Silk keeping is not elegant. It is precise. It is steady. And it is, above all, quiet. Outside your window, the alley is stirring. You hear the jangle of a cart, a rooster somewhere 2 courtyards away, and the rhythmic sweep of a servant's broom. In Chang'an, even before dawn, the city breathes. You light a small oil lamp and tie your hair into a cloth wrap. Your sleeves are bound at the wrists, so they don't trail into anything. Mulberry juice, warm cocoons, or boiling dye. You slip your feet into straw sandals. Today is inspection day. The House of Zhao, while not among the city's noble elites, holds one precious license: the right to produce and trade imperial-grade silk for the Western market. That license came from 3 decades of quiet loyalty, bribes paid at the right time, and silk of such quality that even the court eunuchs took notice. And you are the one who guards it. Not the merchant's son, not his proud cousins, not even Madame Zhao, who oversees the ledgers. You, quiet Mei Lin, who learned to count silk threads before she could count coins, are the one who knows which batch of worms will spin weak, which baskets were poorly fed, which dye barrels need more lime. You make your way to the back of the compound, where the silk house waits like a warm throat. Inside, it's humid and still. The air is filled with soft clicking, the sound of thousands of silkworms quietly chewing mulberry leaves. You pause to listen. That's the first sign of trouble. If the chewing is too loud, it means the leaves are dry, too quiet, and they've gone cold or sick. But this morning, the sound is just right. A gentle, living rustle. You kneel by the first basket and check the leaves. They're moist, clean, evenly cut. The worms look healthy, plump, translucent, and curling as they feed. You count, by instinct more than math. 1 basket, 300 worms, 500 leaves, 2 handfuls of fresh greens needed before noon. You whisper the numbers to yourself and move on. Your assistant, a sleepy girl named Hua, arrives with a steaming pot of rice gruel. She says nothing, only sets it beside you and yawns. You smile. We'll finish early today. She nods and rubs her eyes. Inspection is not dramatic. You walk slowly. You adjust coverings. You smell for rot. You touch the edge of the silk reels to check tension. The cocoon room smells different, warm and slightly bitter. Rows upon rows of soft white bundles hang like stars about to fall. This is where the real treasure lies, not in coins, but in promise. A single thread from each cocoon can stretch longer than your home's garden wall. Woven together, they will ride west in caravans, pass through mountains and deserts, and end up on the shoulders of Persian nobles or in the market stalls of Samarkand. But not yet. You dip a ladle into a basin of lime water and pour it carefully over a batch of newly spun cocoons. The lime helps soften them for unwinding later. Too much, and the thread weakens. Too little, and the reels will snap. Balance is everything. Halfway through your rounds, you notice a corner basket sagging slightly. The worms are still, curled in odd shapes. Their leaves are too damp. You frown and remove a few handfuls. Mold, if left unchecked, can spread like fire. You make a note to toss the lower layer this evening. Back outside, the city is waking fully now. You hear drums in the distance, the morning watch calling time at the southern gate. Somewhere, a poem is being recited aloud. Somewhere else, a mother is scolding her son for losing a sandal in the canal. You take a break. On the low bench by the courtyard pond, Hua pours tea. Not the expensive kind. This is simple green leaf boiled 3 times over. But it's warm and tastes faintly of apricot. Madame Zhao is expecting the inspector by afternoon, Hua says. You nod. He's always late. He always sneezes. Because he wears too much camphor. You both sip in silence. This is your favorite part of the day, not because of the piece, but because of the rhythm. This is the middle beat. The breath. Between 2 tasks, you think briefly of your mother who used to run a dye house near the North Market. She taught you how to spot good thread just by the way it snapped when pulled. She died 5 winters ago, but you still say good morning to her when you mix dyes. You return to work. Next is the dye room. Rows of clay jars hold crushed minerals, dried flowers, and secret blends handed down through hushes and long stairs. Indigo from southern hills, madder root for red, burned peach pits for brown-black. You stir the red vat slowly. It's thick but even. You dip a thread in, swirl it, pull it out and run it through your fingers. It stains true, no streaks. Satisfied, you seal the jars and chalk the lids. Then you head to the reeling table, where the real magic happens. Here, thin threads are drawn from softened cocoons and twisted together onto small wooden reels. It's a dance. Left. Hand steady, right hand turning, eyes fixed on the tension. You test 3 reels. 1 is perfect. The second is too loose. The third, there it is, has a snag. You pull the thread slowly until it breaks. You start again. You do this without thinking now. Your fingers know before your mind does. By mid-morning, the silk house smells like warm wood and flower dye. The sun filters through the slats, casting thin lines of gold across the floors. A swallow lands on the window edge, peering in like an inspector of its own. Then, footsteps. Stiff ones. You recognize the gate before the voice. Inspector Yuan has arrived. He's a thin man who always looks too warm. His robe is high-collared, too tight, and his shoes too clean. He enters with a dramatic sniff. I smell Worm paste. You bow slightly. And a hint of lime. He smirks. The inspection is procedural. He walks slowly through the chambers, pokes a few bundles, asks about last month's real count. You answer calmly. He scribbles things into his ledger that no one will ever read. When he reaches the dye room, he pulls back the lid of the indigo jar and peers in theatrically. Still. Using southern leaf? He asks. Yes. Smells like it. He scribbles again. Then he reaches the reeling table and pulls a random reel from the shelf. He inspects it. You watch his fingers. They don't know what they're doing. He places it back and nods. Passable. You bow again. As he leaves, he turns back and says, "The North inspectors are requesting samples next quarter. Send only the best." "We always do," you reply. He leaves. Hua exhales. "That went well." You nod. "We'll increase the lime bath for the late cocoons and rotate the baskets tomorrow." You finish your rounds by early evening. Outside, the lanterns are being lit one by one. The tea vendors have shifted from leaf to spice. You smell cardamom on the air. You sit by the pond again, this time alone. You have a thread in your hand, stained red, the end tied loosely in a loop. You twist it slowly, watching it turn and untwist in the breeze. You wonder. The next morning arrives with the sound of a falling jug. It smashes against the courtyard tile just before sunrise. An apprentice's mistake. You don't shout. Broken. Pottery is like spilled dye. Not worth anger, only correction. You rise from your mat, stretch your arms, and feel the weight of another humid day settle across your shoulders. The silkworms won't wait for philosophy, nor for the sun to ease up. You dress quickly, binding your sleeves and wrapping your hair, and make your way to the workroom. The cocoons are still. That, in itself, is not a problem. It's the third morning of quiet, when many of them begin to harden. They've finished spinning. It's time to begin unwinding. Unwinding silk is as delicate as handling breath. One wrong movement and the thread snaps. It is a task of rhythm, not force, of knowing when to pull, when to pause, and when to let go. You gather Hua and two of the senior apprentices. The reeling begins. The room fills with soft motion. Bowls of water warmed just enough to soften. The outer layer. Bamboo rods holding cocoons like beads. Fingers twirling threads onto reels. You oversee each step, watching for trembles, for knots, for the faintest signs of rot. One thread snaps. Again, you say softly. The apprentice nods, begins anew. After 2 hours, the first dozen reels are full. You test one. Run the thread. Between two fingers, hold it to the light, stretch it gently until it resists, then coils. It's strong, but not perfect. You take a tiny pinch of the thread and press it to your lips. A little stiff. That means the lime water was just a touch. Too strong. A small batch flaw, not critical, but enough to be noticed by the wrong merchant. You make a note. Reduce lime by 1 ladle next batch. After breakfast, gruel again, this time with crushed almonds, you decide to visit the market. The dye room needs new minerals. You've run low on azurite, and the peach pit charcoal has lost its punch. Also, the last of the ironwood bark has turned to flakes. Time to replenish. The market is a world of its own. Even though you live in one of the quieter neighborhoods of Chang'an, the main thoroughfares remain thick with noise. Ox carts jostle beside scholars. Buddhist monks walk in silent rows past laughing butchers. A traveling puppeteer performs by the well, while a street poet scribbles verses beside a sleeping cat. You move quickly, head down, weaving through the press of bodies. Your first stop is an old man known only as You the Ink. He doesn't sell ink, strangely. He sells dyewood. His stall is shaded by old parasols tied together. and his goods are organized by smell, not color. He greets you with a nod. Still chasing fire, Red? You smile faintly. Just its shadow today. He hands you a wrapped bundle of bark. Strong batch, from Yunnan. Trade caravan just arrived, but it's expensive. How expensive? 1 reel. You glance at the bark. It's dark, rich, and smells faintly of citrus. Good quality. 1 reel, you agree, and hand him a reel from your pouch. Not your best, but not your worst. A fair trade. Next, you head to the mineral cellar for azurite powder. You test a sample on your wrist. It smears easily, fine enough for dye. Expensive again, but you expected that. Indigo has been harder to come by lately, and prices ripple outward like pond drops. The last stop is less official. Down a quieter alley, tucked behind a tea shop, sits an old woman with 3 jars and a quiet smile. She's known simply as Ama. She sells scent infusions, things not officially sanctioned for silk, but long whispered about in the dye world. You squat beside her and point to the second jar. Jasmine seed oil? She nods. Steeped 10 days in moon water. You suppress a smile. These descriptions are more poetry than science. But you know from past visits, her blends work. They leave silk with just enough scent to catch attention, but not enough to overpower. You pay her with a spool of thread the width of your finger. On your way back, the streets are busier. You walk slower, absorbing the rhythms, the rustle of robes, the click of wooden shoes, the laughter of couriers delivering messages from the southern prefectures. Back at the silk house, Hua is waiting. The merchant's son wants to see the finished reels. You raise an eyebrow. Finished? He hasn't even seen the worms. She shrugs. You head to the storage room where the reels are kept on low cedar shelves. The merchant's son, Zhao Ren, is already there, fingers brushing, the edge of a red-dyed spool. He's dressed too finely for a workroom, and his sandals are dustless. He smells of pomade. This one, he says, lifting a reel. It's uneven. You look at it. He's right, but only slightly. The thread at the edge flares by a single fiber's width. Humidity, you say. We adjusted yesterday. He grins like he's won a game. My father says we'll be sending 5 bundles west next cycle. He's expecting them to be flawless. As always, you nod. They will be. He leaves with a rustle of silk too soft to come from your workroom. You return to the dye room and begin preparing the next batch. This one is personal. A mix of madder root, orange blossom, and a pinch of Ama's jasmine oil. It will stain, the fabric a deep russet with a scent of spring. Not for sale, this is for your own experiment. You soak the silk, stir gently and watch the water bloom. As it simmers, you think of all the things silk carries. Wealth, yes, but also stories. You've seen spools sent to weddings, to temples, to caravans that vanish into deserts. Some end up in palace chambers, others in a bride's dowry trunk. Some, you suspect, are never unspooled at all, just held as proof of beauty once touched. By late afternoon, the dye is complete. You hang the fabric in the shaded drying room, careful not to let it crease. It flutters slightly in the wind, catching light like a liquid sunset. You pour yourself tea, this time with a slice of dried plum, and sit by the courtyard pond again. The frogs have returned. One perches on a lotus leaf like a scholar thinking deep thoughts. Hua joins you, thread in hand. She's practicing knots today, learning how to twist 2 broken threads into one seamless line. She struggles. You don't. Help. Some lessons must be learned with the fingers, not the tongue. Do you ever think, she says, about where our silk ends up? All the time. Do they know how much work we do? You shrug. Probably not. She thinks on that, then nods. That's okay, I guess. You smile. It's always been okay. Evening creeps in. Lanterns flicker on across the compound. A neighbor begins playing a slow tune on a two-stringed fiddle. The smell of steamed rice and duck wafts over the back wall. You look at the drying. Silk, russet, soft, faintly floral. You think of your mother again, of her rough hands and quiet pride, of the time she burned an entire vat by forgetting the lime, and still laughed when the cloth turned lavender. You think of the inspector, the merchant's son, the tiny frog on the lotus leaf. And you wonder, the third day begins with wind, not the sharp kind that strips tiles or stirs storms. No, this wind is gentle, steady, and smells of plum blossoms and incense drifting in from temple courtyards. It rustles the paper window screens and flutters the drying silk cloth like a hand, brushing over water. It's a good omen. Today, the silk bundles are due to be packed and sent to the Western Market Pavilion, where they'll be inspected by court officials before joining the next caravan bound for the Hexy corridor. From there, they will travel to the edge of the known world, into kingdoms with strange names and newer suns. You wake early and stretch beside the courtyard pond. The water is still. A single dragonfly hovers, then vanishes. Inside the silk room, the apprentices are already at work. Hua is double-checking the tension on the reels. One of the older girls is polishing the cedar boxes. You nod at their diligence. These are the quiet hours where mistakes are caught, or born. You inspect the final batch of fabric. 5 long bolts of dyed and woven silk, each marked with the House of Zhao's seal. One is deep crimson, flecked with flecks of gold thread, spun so fine they shimmer like dust. Another is indigo so rich it feels like dusk folded into cloth. One, your own experiment, is the soft russet from the day before, infused with jasmine oil and dyed by your own hand. It smells faintly of spring after rain. You carefully wrap each bundle in waxed linen and place them in cedar crates lined with pressed straw. When packed properly, silk travels well. When rushed, it tangles like rumor and dies of sweat. The merchant himself, Master Zhao, arrives to inspect the crates. He is a heavy-set man with clever hands and tired eyes. He trusts you, but he checks everything. Not because he doubts your skill, but because the stakes are high. One flawed thread in a shipment marked for the court eunuchs, and the family's license could vanish like steam. He unwraps the russet silk, runs it between his fingers, and nods. "Is that jasmine?" he asks. You bow slightly. "A trace for the spring festival buyers. It will linger on the cloth." He doesn't smile, but his eyebrows rise. "Approval. Let's keep that blend for next cycle," he mutters, wrapping it again. The crates are sealed with stamped wax, red, clean, and embossed with the house sigil. A twin-finned carp leaping over a wave. The image was chosen years ago, meant to suggest agility and profit. Zhao's son, Ren, enters just as the porters arrive. He says little today, just lifts a lid, checks a knot, and nods. No smugness, just responsibility. Maybe he's learning. The porters grunt and lift the crates. Their sandals scuff the stone as they carry the silk out into the alleyway and toward the market. You follow just far enough to watch the crates disappear down the southern street. A shipment gone always feels like an exhale. Later in the courtyard, you and Hua sweep the workroom. Not a punishment, just ritual. Silk dust gathers even where no wind blows, and cleaning after shipment day is as much about resetting the rhythm as it is about tidiness. Hua pauses and asks, "Will any of that go to the palace?" "Maybe." "Will they know it was yours?" You shrug. "They'll think it came from House Zhao." "But we did the work." You nod. "But they paid for it," you add. "And when the work is perfect, they keep paying." She doesn't like that answer, but she accepts it. After the sweeping is done, you visit the garden behind the dye house. It's small, mostly herbs and dye plants. madder, woad, safflower, and the stubborn yellow blooms of wild chrysanthemum. You run your fingers along the stems and pull a few sprigs for drying. You notice the sky has changed. The clouds have shifted to soft streaks, high and fast, chasing something westward. That's the direction your silk is heading now. Into markets where silk is traded for glass, for turquoise, for languages that sing in tones you'll never learn. You wonder where the russet bolt will end up. Maybe on a minor noble's shoulders in Bactria. Maybe as curtain cloth in a wealthy merchant's house in Kashgar. Maybe even as wrapping for something sacred, an offering or a burial shroud. You'll never know. You return to the workroom, begin preparing the next cycle. You review the cocoon baskets. One batch is late. The worms are sluggish. You make a note to replace their leaves with fresher mulch and adjust the airflow. You also begin mixing a new test dye, indigo base with crushed apricot bark. You don't know what color it will yield. That's part of the joy. As the sun begins to dip behind the west wall, you sit with Hua again by the pond. She's working on her knots. She's better now. You can tell by the way her fingers pause. Not out of hesitation, but out of habit. She's learning when not to pull. She asks, "Will you ever leave Chang'an?" You laugh quietly. "Where would I go? There are caravans, traders. You could ride west. And do what? Weave silk in desert wind?" She shrugs. "Teach, count stars, sell thread to kings." You smile. "I like it here. I know the baskets. I know the worms. I know where the sun hits the dye room floor." She nods. But her eyes still look west. The lanterns begin to glow, one by one. Evening wind rustles the reeds beside the pond. Somewhere beyond the gate, a storyteller is reciting the tale of a scholar who fell in love with the moon. You rise and brush dust from your sleeves. "Tomorrow," you say, "we clean the lime barrels." She groans. You laugh. You return to your room and light a single taper. On your shelf sits a roll of silk. Your own, not for sale. You run your hand across it. It smells faintly of flowers and ash. You've never worn it. It's not meant to be worn. It's proof. A private thing. You sit down and write a short note on rice paper. Red dye strong. Bark from used batch best yet. Oil blend held. Keep the seed next spring. You fold the note, slide it into the silk's fold, and seal the bundle. Someday, maybe someone will find it. Maybe not, but you'll know. And as the city quiets, the birds nest, and the silk keeper closes her doors, you think. The paper door slid open with a whisper. You stepped into the stillness of the Mizuya, the preparation room behind the tea room, at exactly the 5th chime of the bell tower. That was your job, to arrive not early, not late, but exactly when. The shadows curved along the far wall like an ink stroke. Precision was part of the ritual. You are Haruki, junior assistant to the Ueda House of Tea, in a quiet district of Edo in the mid-18th century. You are 19 years old. You do not speak unless asked. You do not pour unless told. And you do not, under any circumstances, break the silence unless a pot is on fire. The air is warm, thick with steam and powdered charcoal. The tea house has not yet opened. There are no guests. There is only the room, the tools, and the day ahead. You slip off your sandals and step onto the cool, worn planks. The floor smells faintly of camphor and tatami. The kama, the iron kettle, has already been cleaned. The brazier glows faintly under its black belly. You kneel beside it and check the ash bed. Still even. No clumps. That's good. Beside the kettle sits the mizusashi, the fresh water jar, ceramic, wrapped in a soft cloth. You lift the lid and check the level. Just enough. You nod to yourself and begin preparing the utensils. There is comfort in this order. The chasen, bamboo whisk, the chashaku, tea scoop, the natsume, powder container, and the silk cloths. Each has a place. Each has a rhythm. You move like you've been trained, slowly, cleanly. You learned early that moving quickly in the tea room only made you slower. A misplaced whisk, a clumsy pour, a knocked-over ladle. All were crimes here, though no one called them that. They just meant eyes lowered, trust removed. Your master, Ueda Sensei, believes in quiet perfection. He does not strike or scold. He simply forgets students who are too loud. You intend to be remembered. Today there will be 3 guests, all minor samurai from the northern provinces. One is a poet. One is a widow. One is a tax official who thinks he understands tea. He doesn't. Your job is not to impress them. Your job is to support the host, Ueda Sensei, as he performs the ceremony. You will fetch the water, sweep the walkway, fan the coals if the wind dies, and most importantly, you will not make noise. You sweep the roji, the path through the garden, before the guests arrive. Not with haste, but in slow arcs, allowing the dust to settle naturally behind your strokes. You trim one blade of grass sticking out of line. Just one. Back inside, you fold the cloths. Fukusa, with practiced hands. Left corner, fold, right edge, flatten. A ritual in itself. You pause only once to sip water from a lacquered cup. The water is slightly warm as it should be. Nothing shocks the stomach before tea. Ueda Sensei enters without announcement. You hear his soft sandals before you see him. His robe is gray, undecorated, the sleeve edges crisp with starch. He nods once at your arrangement. You bow, forehead to mat, then rise and step back. The guests arrive not long after, one by one. In silence, you watch from behind the screen as they remove their sandals, bow, and step into the tea room with careful reverence. None speak. The widow walks with particular grace, her sleeves like river eels slipping across the mat. They, tax official, clears his throat. Once, too loudly. Ueda Sensei says nothing, but you notice the flicker in his eyebrow. You prepare the brazier again. The coals are fine, but the wind has changed. A slight draft moves through the lower panel. You adjust the fire guard. No sound, no disturbance, just the flick of cloth on bamboo. Ueda Sensei begins the ritual. First he bows. Then, slowly, he lifts the ladle, pours hot water into the bowl, and rinses it. Every movement is deliberate, like ink brushing paper. You follow with the towels. Folded, warmed, presented, always from the left. The guests watch intently. The tax official leans slightly forward. The widow does not move. The poet, tall with a small scar under one eye, closes his eyes as the steam rises. When the tea is finally served, you move to pour the second pot of water behind the screen. Not because it's needed, but because it's part of the rhythm. Movement to match movement. In the garden, a bird chirps once, then stops. The wind moves. The widow lifts her bowl and tilts it, not to drink, but to admire the glaze. Blue-gray, with faint swirls like clouds. No one speaks. After the third round of tea, the tax official clears his throat again. This time, Ueda Sensei lifts his eyes. Just once. Just long enough. Silence returns. You prepare the final towels. When the guests leave, they do so slowly. Bowing. Thanking. Saying nothing that isn't necessary. You begin the cleanup, rinsing each utensil 3 times. Once for use, once for tradition, once for peace. You dry each piece with a cloth warmed in the sleeve of your robe. Ueda Sensei watches from the corner, hands folded. You didn't spill today, he says. You bow. You swept the roji well. Another bow. He picks up one cloth, folds it again. smoother than you did. Next time, try not to trim the grass. Just bend it. Let it live. You nod. He walks out. The room smells now of used charcoal, faint matcha, and pressed cotton. The stillness feels different. Not empty, but full. You sit, for a moment, beside the kettle. The water has cooled. The fire is ash. You do not need to speak. There is no audience. But you whisper a small thought to yourself. Perfection is not when nothing more can be added, but when nothing needs to be removed. You rise, pack the tools, and extinguish the fire with a breath of warm air and a bamboo lid. And as you slide, the paper door closed behind you, you think, the following morning begins before the sun. The city is still, just the creak of the floor under your feet and the low moan of a wind that hasn't decided whether it wants to become a storm or vanish. You are back in the Mizuya, sleeves bound, cloth folded, kettle resting on its hook. Today will not be a ceremony. Today is a practice day. No guests, no incense, no whispered bows or wandering poets. Only Ueda-sensei and your hands, which will be watched more closely than the leaves outside the window. These are the days you fear most. When the guests are gone, the silence grows larger. You begin with the fire. Not fresh, but revived. You pull glowing embers from yesterday's bed and rebuild them with twigs, pine slivers, and patience. The smoke curls reluctantly, as if unsure whether it wants to rise or rest. You coax it gently. Fan it once. Wait. Fan again. Wait. Ueda-sensei arrives. Without warning, he stands near the door, watching. He does not speak. He nods once when the flame catches. You pour water into the kama, slowly, so as not to crack the iron with sudden heat. You place the lid gently atop the pot, resting it slightly askew to let the steam whisper through the seam. That part always felt like a secret to you. How the pot speaks without boiling. How the water hums but never yells. Today's task is a demonstration. You will run a full tea sequence alone. Not for guests, not for applause, for observation. Ueda-sensei gestures to the tatami. You kneel, alone, in the tea room. It feels larger when it's empty. The scroll on the wall today says nothing. It's blank parchment. A teaching moment. You breathe once, then begin. You bow to the space. You clean the bowl. You raise the hishaku, ladle, and pour the water with the tilt you've practiced 100 times. The chasen flickers through the tea powder. Not too fast, not too still. The green froth forms a soft spiral. You bow again. Set down the tools. Fold the cloth. Breathe again. Ueda-sensei says nothing. For a long time, then, again. You repeat the sequence. The second time, your elbow brushes the ladle's handle. It clicks against the rim, barely audible. But it's there. He tilts his head. Pause. Do it again. The third time is better. The fourth, smoother still, on the fifth, he raises a hand. Stop. You look up. You didn't clean the chashaku properly before returning it. You bow. Do it again. You clean it. Wipe. Fold. Set. All without speaking. He nods. Now we begin. That was warm-up. Now, real practice. He brings out a new element. Calligraphy. You are to perform a shortened tea sequence with a guest scroll. Present. But the scroll today isn't traditional. It's been written by a guest, the poet from the day before. Apparently, he had left it with Ueda-sensei after the ceremony. You unfurl it. The writing is delicate but hard to read. Light brush, short strokes. Written more like a sketch than a poem. Ueda-sensei says, "You will read it aloud before the tea begins." Your heart stumbles. "But I cannot read it," you say honestly. "You can read the tea." "Try." You nod. But your hands sweat. You kneel again. You bow. You begin the sequence. When the moment comes to read the scroll, you glance up, breathe deeply, and say nothing. The words are illegible. You remain bowed, and simply say, "I do not know what this poem means." There is a long pause. Ueda-sensei does not react. He simply gestures. Continue. You pour the tea. Serve the invisible guest. Fold the cloth. End the sequence. When you return to the Mizuya, he follows. He sits beside the window overlooking the plums tree. "The poem," he says, "was not written to be read." You look at him. He continues, "The poet left it for the room, not the eyes. You honored it by leaving it unspoken." You exhale slowly. "But," he adds, "next time, bow longer. And read the strokes even if you cannot read the words." You nod. The lesson is clear. Tea is not about answers. It is about attentiveness. If the poem cannot be read, then you let it breathe. Let it exist. Let the guest fill the silence with their own meaning. You rise to clean the utensils again. The ladle creaks slightly as it rests against the kettle. You adjust it. The sound fades. Outside, the wind rises again, just enough to stir the paper walls. Ueda-sensei stands. He says only, "You will host next week's final bowl." You freeze. Hosting the final bowl of a ceremony is usually a senior's role, a symbol of trust. You bow low, not trusting yourself to speak. And as the wind shifts and the steam rises again, you think, perhaps mastery is not knowing every stroke, but knowing which silences to leave untouched. The tea house was swept twice, that morning. Not because it was dusty, but because it calmed your nerves. Each stroke of the broom was a breath. Each brush across the threshold a pause. You weren't just preparing the space. You were preparing yourself. Today, you would host the final bowl. Ueda-sensei had said nothing more since his quiet announcement. He had not corrected your posture, nor adjusted your cloth folds. That, more than anything, meant he was watching. Trust in his world was a silent thing. The guests would arrive at the hour of the snake. 3 again, but different this time. A rice official, a potter, and a retired falconer who had once served a minor lord in the south. None were of high rank, but none were ordinary. Ueda-sensei had selected them with care. You laid the tools with precise hands. The natsume, a soft gold lacquered container, sat at a respectful angle from the chawan. The tea bowl you had chosen yourself. Gray earthenware, cracked slightly at the rim, shaped unevenly by the potter you met last spring. It was not elegant, but it was honest. The coals burned low, steady. You fed them early with soft pine and fanned them into shape. Ueda-sensei entered with the guests, then stepped aside. This was your room now. You bowed, slowly, letting the air settle before you moved. The guests did not speak. They knew this was the last bowl, the moment where time loosens, where the form becomes even more spare, and silence does the work of words. You began. You bowed to the tools, lifted the ladle, poured the water, cleaned the bowl, not quickly, but with the memory of your hundreds of prior cleanings guiding you. Each flick of cloth, each turn of the wrist, it all felt still and firm and true. You reached for the chashaku, the scoop. The powdered tea shimmered like green river dust in the light. You tapped the right amount into the bowl, 1.5 scoops, plus a final tap for luck. Not ritual. Memory, you poured the water. Whisked. Gently, the froth formed quickly, rising, like cloud across pond. Then you paused and offered the bowl to the rice official, the first guest. He accepted with 2 hands, bowed, and turned the bowl slightly, as was proper. He sipped. Not greedily, not politely, but with attention. He set the bowl down, you retrieved it, cleaned it once, and held it in your lap. You looked at it then, not with your host's eyes, but your own. The moonlight cracked glaze reflected the coal's glow. A shadow of your own face curled along the rim. And for just a moment, you remembered your father. He had been a grain counter for the local storehouse. Not a man of ceremony, but a man of repetition, of structure, of rhythm. He had once told you, "We live in patterns, son. If we honor them, they hold us. If we break them, we drift." You saw now that the tea ceremony was not about impressing guests or preserving ancient ways. It was about holding a pattern just long enough that others could breathe in its shape. The bowl passed to the falconer, then to the potter. When it returned to you, you rinsed it clean and placed it gently on the mat. You bowed again, and that was it. No applause, no compliments, just silence. The guests rose, bowed, and left. Ueda Sensei remained. He walked over to the bowl, picked it up, and turned it in his hands. "This bowl," he said, "was once too shallow." You waited. "But now it holds the moon." He handed it back to you and walked away. You sat by the open screen as the shadows lengthened. The light through the plum branches dappled your hands. You placed the bowl beside you, not on a stand, just in the dust, where it belonged. The water in the kettle was still warm. You poured one more bowl for yourself. Slowly. No audience. No structure. No cloth, just tea. Steam rose again. A swallow darted across the garden. And you thought, maybe we don't serve tea to show who we are, but to remember how quietly we can exist within the lives of others. The street was already wet by the time you set down your first bucket. Not from rain, from suds and muck, and the strange puddles that formed every Tuesday behind Mr. Glenthorpe's cheese stall, which everyone suspected were not entirely dairy-related. But you didn't have time to investigate. You are Edith Burrow, washerwoman, unmarried, uncourted, unbothered. And this is your street, whether the rest of London knows it or not. Specifically, a narrow crook off Cheapside, sandwiched between a fishmonger and an apothecary who swears his cat can read Latin. It's laundry day, and not just any laundry day. Today, you've been given the largest load of your career. 4 gowns, 5 underthings, 6 kerchiefs, 2 pairs of men's hose, 1 child's cap, a bishop's stole, and something that might once have been a tablecloth or possibly a sail. You adjust your apron, already damp from earlier rinsing, and start heating the water in your iron kettle. Behind you, the wash tubs wait like small wooden coffins, deep, wide, and promising blisters. The neighbor's boy, Tom, pokes his head around the alley corner. "Miss Edith," he calls. "You forgot your lie." You scowl. "I didn't forget. I was avoiding it." He grins and sets the heavy jug down by your feet. "Apothecaries lie. Strong as guilt," he says proudly, repeating what the shopkeep told him. You nod. "Good. We'll need it." The first load begins with linens, kerchiefs, and hose. You scrub with a flat stick across the ridged board, the rhythm tapping like a song. Down, press, drag, lift. Bubbles rise, then brown. You lift each item to inspect the stains, the tears, the seams. Half of them are stitched so poorly they unravel with a hard stare. You mutter about rich folk who can't thread a needle. As the steam builds, your hands go red. The lye burns slightly. It always does. But the warmth in the air and the weight of the cloth keep your focus. The bishop's stole is next. Fine embroidery, cross-stitched with gold thread along the edge. It smells faintly of incense, wine, and regret. You scrub gently, swishing it in clean water first. The wine stain is new, likely Sunday's sermon. You picture him leaning too far over the altar and smile. As you hang it to dry, A feather falls from the folds. Black. Shiny. From a rook, you think. You pause. You once heard that rooks bring warnings, or wisdom, or both, depending on whether they land near your window or steal your bread. You pick up the feather and set it on the windowsill. It sways, then stills. The second tub is for gowns. The gowns are another matter entirely. Heavy velvet, mud at the hems, powder still in the collars, perfume clinging like vanity. You lift one and nearly fall backward from its weight. Whoever wore this had no plans of walking far or fast. You unlace the bodice. Inside is a dried sprig of lavender, half crumbled. A keepsake? A token? Or just to keep the lice away? You shrug and begin the soak. The sun rises higher, and the lane fills with noise. Vendors shouting, carts clattering, someone arguing about sausage length. A fight breaks out over a missing coin purse. You keep scrubbing. By midday, your back aches. You break briefly to drink water and eat half a scone. The baker's daughter traded you for rinsing her apron last week. You use the empty jug to press water from the wet gowns. You hang them on the line that runs between your door and the butcher's. Back wall. He doesn't mind. He says it keeps the rats confused. One of the gowns drips a pale green dye onto the cobbles. You watch it pool. That one, you suspect, will fade unevenly. But it's not your problem. You wash, you don't restore. By afternoon, the sun has shifted and the tubs are dark with use. You refill one, boil more water, scrape the soap remnants into a bucket, and begin the child's cap. It's tiny, lace-edged, soft. You feel a tug in your chest. Not emotion exactly, just memory. You had one like this once, when your sister was born. You'd folded it into her cradle the day they brought her home from the midwife. She'd screamed all night. You laughed at the time. Now you just fold the cap and place it in the rinse bowl. The final load is the sail, or tablecloth, or curtain. It's huge, rough. Impossible to tell if it was ever clean. You heave it over the barrel and pour 3 buckets of scalding water across it. It smells of wine, smoke, and mildew. You mutter a quiet curse and add double soap. As you scrub, the rook feather blows off the sill. It lands on the tablecloth. You pause. You're tired. But something about the moment sticks. You pull the cloth, slowly from the water, and lay it across the clean bench. There, stitched into one corner, is a name. Agnes. You frown. That wasn't on the laundry list. It takes a moment to place the name. Then you remember. Agnes, the midwife's cousin, lived in the far end of the lane. Died last winter. Quietly. Alone. You'd heard someone took her linens, said they'd be put to use. You run your fingers across the name. The thread is pale blue, barely visible now. Someone stitched it carefully, not for beauty, but for permanence. You wash the cloth gently. No lie, just warm water. Then hang. At last, on the far end of the line. It sways in the breeze, featherweight, though heavier than all the gowns put together. By evening, the tubs are empty. Your hands are raw, nails soft, shoulders aching. You fold the dry linens, sort them into the proper bins. You pack the gowns in cloth wrappings, tie them with twine. The hose go into the basket. The bishop's stole, now shining faintly, rests atop the pile like a benediction. You take one last look at the rook feather. You don't keep it. You let it blow down the alley, and as the last rays of the sun strike the wet cobbles, you sit for a moment with your hands in your lap and your back against the stone wall. And you think, some days are for singing, some for resting, but this one was for washing what the world forgot. The next morning, your hands are stiff. You flex them in a bowl of warm water as steam curls around your wrists like small ghosts. The air smells of ashes and damp wool. The soap pot still sits on the coals, simmering low. Fat scraps from the butcher, lye from the apothecary, a handful of crushed lavender for mercy. Outside, the street is still wet from yesterday. The laundry line sags gently between your door and the butcher's wall. On it, the last of the linens flutter, clean, folded, folded again. And one is missing. You notice it before you even take a full breath. The bishop's stole is gone. At first you wonder if the wind took it, but the twine is unbroken, the peg, still clipped. Someone took it. Deliberately. You lean out the door, eyes scanning the narrow lane. The same cart is rumbling over the cobbles. The same cat is staring at you with judgment, but the stole is nowhere. You do not panic. Instead, you sit down and start scrubbing the wooden bench. There is always something to clean. You learned long ago that worrying doesn't lift stains. As you scrub, Tom, still barefoot, still sticky, runs up the lane, waving a square of paper. Edith, news, you raise an eyebrow. Unless it's news of a linen thief, I've no time. No thief, he pants. But they're posting new street orders. Starting today, all washerwomen must pay a fee to use public drains. You stop mid-scrub. What fee? A penny per tub. They posted it by St. Mildred's Gate. You stand slowly. That's 3 pennies for yesterday. He nods. Unless you count the child's cap as half. You wipe your hands and walk. To the gate yourself. The decree is posted on old parchment, written in ink that already smudged. To reduce foul odors and street blockages, all laundresses must henceforth pay a usage toll of 1 penny per water bin, emptied into the common drains. Exceptions include city-employed laundresses and those in service to gentry households. Signed, Councillor Westwell, and the mayor's scribe, whose name is spelled wrong. You stare at it. 3 pennies. That's half a week's bread. And no mentions of reimbursement for stolen stoles. You march to the apothecary's stall first. He knows everyone's business. He blinks behind round spectacles. A stole? Bishops, you say? Fine linen, gold thread, wine stain. Missing. He whistles. Could be the lads from Barking Lane. They were seen swapping clerical scraps for pints at the Lamb and Sickle. You nod and head that way. It takes 3 shops, 1 favor, and a bribe in the form of a soap cake to get the next clue. Check the curtain stall, the baker's cousin says. They've been trimming old cloth into hems. When you arrive at the stall, there it is, cut in half. One side folded into curtain trim, the other already sold as lining for a vestment. You stare at it. The bishop's stole. The name tag. Small, careful stitches at the edge, is still there. You pick it up. Ma'am, the curtain seller says, you'll need to pay. You hold up your hands, red and cracked. I already did. The argument is short, but pointed. In the end, he lets you take the piece. You walk home with it under your arm. Back in your alley, you sew. Not to fix it exactly, just to close it, to give it some dignity. The stole is shorter, now stained at the edge, threadbare at the seam. But it's still soft, still carries the smell of incense and soap. You fold it and place it in your bin. Then you retrieve the tablecloth, the one with Agnes's name. You lay it on the bench. The embroidery is nearly gone. The threads faded further. You begin restitching her name. You don't know why. No one asked. No one will check. But it matters. By mid-afternoon, the councilman himself is walking the streets. You see him in his fine black hat, flanked by a scribe and a guard. He pauses near your line, pinching his nose. You bow slightly. "My lords." "Miss," he says. "A laundress, I presume." You nod. "Have you paid your water levy?" You raise an eyebrow. "I always pay my debts. In sweat. First, in coin second," he smirks. Well said, but the law is coin first as of today. You reach into your apron and drop 3 buttons into his palm. He stares. Not coin, he mutters, but enough for 2 pairs of sleeves and a latching clasp, you reply. Trade's trade. He's about to argue, but the guard laughs. She's right. The scribe writes it down. They move on. You exhale. That night, you light a candle and press the stole flat. You leave it on the sill beside the rook feather, which has returned. You don't question how. You sip your tea, barely warm, and rest. Your chin in your hands. The moonlight filters through the curtain now sewn with stolen silk, and you think, perhaps a laundress doesn't just clean cloth. She remembers the lives that touched it, even when no one else does. By the 3rd day, your hands are raw in places you didn't know could sting. The buckets creak when you lift them. The iron pot hisses louder than usual, and your fingers, once nimble with a needle, curl reluctantly around the scrub stick. But the laundry doesn't pause for sore hands. Not in your alley, not in your lifetime. This morning, you've already washed 8 shirts, 3 waistcoats, and 1 pair of drawers that someone's embroidered with a coat of arms made entirely of fish. You don't ask, you simply scrub. Tom arrives, as he often does, trailing crumbs and stories. They say Mistress Halloway's boy got caught pickpocketing a priest, he says, climbing onto your rinsing bench. He claims it was for bread, but everyone knows he wanted sweets. You nod. And what's that got to do with my wash bin? He grins. Nothing. Just the city's full of noise today. He's right. You can hear it. The rising hum of unrest. The washerwomen are talking. The market girls are whispering. Even the fishmongers are grumbling as they scale trout. The new water levy has settled badly with the working lanes. 3 pennies per tub might not seem like much to the mayor's scribe, but to you, it means fewer meals, fewer scraps for soap, fewer hours of rest. And when you walk to the well near St. Mildred's gate, you see them. 4 other women with cracked hands and damp aprons, buckets on hips and eyes sharper than needles. One of them speaks as you draw water. They'll charge for the rain next, she says. Another snorts. We'll pay to breathe before long. You don't speak, but you nod. They're tired. You're all tired. That evening, after scrubbing the bishop's stole 1 final time, what's left of it, you set it out again, not for drying, but for show. You drape it on the line, edge facing the street, where the name is clearly visible. Stolen, returned, washed again. You light a small candle in the window. No one remarks on it aloud. But 2 girls from the bakery walk past slower than usual, eyes flicking toward the cloth. The next morning, there's a line. Not for bread, not for grain, for your soap. 3 women ask if they can buy a cake. You don't sell soap. But today, you say yes. They pay in buttons, in favors, in flour. 1 woman gives you a ribbon her daughter never wore. Another offers 3 cracked combs. You take them all. That afternoon, a guard from the city walks through the alley. He pauses at your bench. Miss Burrow, he says. You nod. Rumor says you're leading a protest. You shake your head. I'm washing clothes. He leans in. You're selling soap. I always have. But now you're bartering. You raise your hands. I wash. They pay. Same as always. He squints. But he leaves. You return to the basin and stir the next pot. As the steam rises, so does your resolve. Later that week, the scribe returns. He brings a message from Councillor Westwell. The levy will stay, but allowances will be made. 1 penny may be paid per day, not per tub, and those who provide soap to the street may petition for credit. It's not a victory, but it's a change. And in your world, change usually comes with water stains and blistered palms. You don't cheer. You don't cry. You simply nod and write the names of 3 women, Maria, Anne, and Ruth, on a scrap of linen. You pin it to your curtain. That night, the rook lands on your line again. It doesn't caw. It doesn't steal. It just stays, watching like it knows something has shifted. You pour the last of your lie into the kettle and begin a fresh batch. The moon rises, the linen flutters, and you think, perhaps laundry isn't just the art of cleaning. Perhaps it's the softest kind of resistance. The quiet boiling of water when the world grows cold. The inkstone was black, smooth, and slightly chipped on one side. It had been with you for 7 years, since the day Master Bahram handed it to you with a grunt and the words, "Drop this, and I drop you." You are Jalal, a scribe in the city of Isfahan, year 1116 of the Common Era, working under the patronage of a minor vizier who believes poetry is the best way to justify his salary. Your job is simple. Write what you're told. Write it well, and keep your inkstone wet, your paper dry, and your elbows off the illuminated margins. You are halfway through a verse about the reflection of the moon in the vizier's bathwater when it happens. A camel sneezes. Not outside, not in the stable, but inside the courtyard, where it most certainly should not be. You look up in time to see your inkwell rattle, your scroll flutter, and your inkstone, beloved, heavy, reliable, tip gently off the edge of the low table and into the flower bed. You freeze. So does the camel. It looks at you, offended. "Shoo," you whisper, waving your hand as if this will undo the moment. The camel blinks slowly. You rise, step over the spilled paper, and retrieve the inkstone. It's there, half buried in wet dirt, mud clinging to the bottom like stubborn poetry. You wipe it gently. It's warm from the sun, but the chip is deeper now. You sigh. The camel, satisfied, exits as if it had a meeting elsewhere. Later, the vizier arrives, draped in rose-scented robes and trailing a new verse behind him like smoke. He sits, sighs, and dictates. "Write this," he says. "Even the air bows to the fragrance of my words." You dip your brush in the last of your ink, and the candles lean closer when I speak. You pause. "That's very descriptive, my lord," he beams. "I saw it in a dream." You nod and write it down. The inkstone, now stained with a faint green edge from the flower bed, slides slightly as you move. It doesn't sit flat anymore. This bothers you more than it should. By mid-afternoon, you've copied 5 pages of verse, rewritten 3 more due to sand smudges, and made a personal note to never again feed dates to a camel near an open archway. Your fellow scribe, Shams, leans over and mutters, "You're pressing too hard on the curves." You glance at the script. He's right. Your MM is too thick. Your nun is uneven. You adjust. Breathe slower. Then your reed pen splinters. You pause. Again. This day is cursed. You step outside into the courtyard and sit by the shade of the old almond tree. The breeze carries the scent of mint from the kitchen garden. A boy runs past, trailing a kite made of old rice paper and faded prayers. You pull out a cloth and clean your inkstone again. This time, you notice the crack. Small, spreading. A quiet ache forms in your chest. Not for the stone itself, but for the hours it represented. Countless verses, letters, contracts, stories, all shaped by this small, unassuming object. It had held the darkest blues, the most vibrant reds, the silkiest charcoal gray. You once mixed a whole love letter set in saffron gold for a merchant's daughter. She married a potter instead. You return to your table. The vizier is gone. You finish the last verse. You fold the paper. You rinse the reed and set it to dry. Then you place the inkstone in its pouch. Not your usual one, but a softer one, lined with felt. You don't want it to bump against anything else, Shams notices. Still keeping it? You nod. I would. He reaches into his satchel and pulls out an old stone. My first one. Doesn't work anymore, but I still carry it. You smile. For luck? For memory. You place the pouch in your satchel. And as the sun dips below the roof tiles, casting golden shadows across the tiled floor, you think, maybe it wasn't the ink that told the story all these years, but the stone that caught every pause in your hand. The following day, you return to the scriptorium with a new reed pen and a cautious hope that no camels have been permitted indoors. You tuck the cracked inkstone, cleaned, dried, and nestled in felt, into your writing pouch as gently as if it were a relic. It doesn't sit as flat as it used to, and it rocks slightly when you dip the brush, but you've learned to adjust. Even your hand has changed, more upright, more forgiving. Across from you, Shams is copying a land deed written entirely in broken couplets. He mutters under his breath with each line. You catch snippets. To the west, a garden where cats sleep beside lemons. What is this madness? You smile but say nothing. Your task today is far more delicate, making a duplicate of a royal marriage contract, penned originally by a court scribe whose signature curves like a heron's neck. The original is locked in a lacquered chest. You are working from a draft. The text is repetitive. Titles, lineages, blessings repeated thrice. But in the margin, just beneath the groom's grandfather's name, you see something strange. A poem, faint, tilted, written in the same hand as the draft, but clearly not part of the contract. You lean closer. If the moon should forget its path, let it follow the scent of rosewater. You stare at the line. It is not labeled, not signed. Just there, like a whisper caught beneath the folds of silk. You glance at Shams. He's now drawing a crude camel in the corner of his deed copy. It looks smug. You return to your own work and keep copying. But the poem lingers, not because it's beautiful, though it is, and not because it's hidden, but because it's so carefully hidden. You wonder who wrote it. The court scribe? A distracted apprentice? Or someone clever enough to hide longing in a legal record? As you dip your brush again, the ink in your stone pools unevenly. The crack, small though it is, catches the pigment and channels it sideways. A faint trail creeps along the edge. You wipe it gently and press your fingers against the stone's base. It's widening. Later, when the vizier arrives, trailing the scent of melon and pomade, he barely glances at your work. Continue copying, he says, handing you a folded note. This is the bride's dowry list. Be accurate. Her father counts pots like they're pearls. You nod and open the scroll. More titles, more vessels, more obligations. Nothing poetic, but after the vizier leaves, you unroll the marriage contract. Again. You stare at the margin. The poem is still there. You consider copying it for yourself. Just the line, onto your own paper. But something stops you. It feels like stealing a breath someone meant only for themselves. Instead, you lift your brush and write something new. Not in the contract, just on your own paper, on the back of a practice sheet. Inkstone cracked, but still it holds the world in its trembling bowl. Shams glances up. Writing letters again? No, you say. Just trying to remember what the hand forgets. He grins. You're becoming a poet. You raise your eyebrows. That would be terrible for business, but in truth, you are moved by the stone, by the poem, by the quiet idea that scribes, who write for others, might still carve space for their own secret lines. You wrap up the day's scrolls, stack the dry ones, sprinkle sand over the newer ink. You wipe your brush clean, oil the tip. Then, without quite meaning to, you press your thumb against the crack in the inkstone and whisper quietly, "Still with me?" It doesn't answer, but it doesn't leak either. And as the courtyard light fades and the shadows lengthen along the mosaic tiles, you gather your things and think, maybe it's not that the stone is broken. but that you now know where it can still hold. You know the inkstone won't last through another summer. By now the crack is deeper, small but definite. The base tilts slightly when set down, and if you aren't careful, the ink pools along the edge where it dries too quickly and flakes. You've adjusted, shifted your hand, altered your grip, slowed your pace. But yesterday you caught yourself pressing too hard with the reed pen, trying to make a stubborn line behave, and the pressure made the stone groan, not aloud, just beneath your fingers, like something remembering how it used to hold more. So today, after copying 6 recipes for throat-clearing elixirs and a polite rejection letter to a courtier with far too many metaphors, you wrap your inkstone in felt and slip it into your satchel, and you walk to the market. The Bazaar of Isfahan is a city inside a city. Vaulted ceilings, spice dust in the air, light spilling through mosaic windows and onto woven carpets like gold shaken from a bowl. You walk past dates, thread, perfume, ink, birds, ink, scrolls, ink. It's easy to get lost. You find the ink seller's stall tucked between a bookbinder and a copper merchant. The man behind the table is missing 2 teeth and wears a smudge of blue under one eye. He looks up. "Scholar?" "Scribe," you reply. He nods, as if that explains everything. "Stone or color?" "Stone." He gestures toward a row of shallow bowls. Some are glazed, some plain. One has been carved to look like a fish with its mouth open, ink meant to pool in the gills. You lift one. Too light. Another. Too smooth. Then you spot a rectangular stone, plain black, unassuming. It sits flat. It's cool to the touch, and it holds a weight that feels right. "How much?" you ask. He names a price that feels like a test. You counter. He scoffs. You add a reed pen and half a vial of your own charcoal powder as barter. He considers, then nods. You hand over the pouch, but before placing the new inkstone in your bag, you pause. You unwrap the old stone. He sees the crack immediately. Still. "Using this?" You nod. He picks it up, turns it in his hand, and runs a finger along the edge. "This one's been with you 7 years. 7 years is long for ink," he says. "Most get impatient after 5. You smile faintly. He sets it down, beside the new one. "Keep it," he says. "The old one?" He shrugs. "Some tools don't stop working. They just change what they're for." You carry both home. That evening, you don't write for the vizier. You write for yourself, on soft paper, thin, unrolled. You use the new stone, steady, clean, obedient. But beside it sits the old one, cracked, sloped, and still catching light in the right places. You dip your brush, and you write. Some ink is for others, some is for the wind, and some never dries at all. You set down the brush. Outside, the courtyard is quiet. The camel, yes, that one, is chewing lazily in the outer stall. You have forgiven it, mostly. You wrap the old stone in cloth again. You place it in a lacquered box. You don't hide it, but you don't use it either. It has done enough, and as the moon rises over the tiled roofs, casting shadows shaped like calligraphy across the walls, you close the scroll and think. Perhaps the inkstone didn't break. Perhaps it just stopped, asking to be used, so you'd remember to write something truly your own.